Hey, Peyton, nice to see you again and welcome to World of Ideas.
AIDEAS.
Welcome to AIDEAS podcast. And this time we have a quote by Nadella because we ourselves asked what would be the most valuable skill and what remains true even in a world which is changing so fast and so unpredictably and volatile. And he says, how do you be a learn-it-all and not a know-it-all is, in his framing, the most important skill for staying relevant. He argues unlearning old habits is harder than learning new ones. And topped by that, Demis Hassabis has his pick for the next generation's essential skill would then be learning how to learn. Because forecasting, even a decade out, is now nearly impossible. So Peyton, how do these skills serve us in a world which is so unpredictable?
Good to be back. Yeah, learning is really important. It's always been important to learn how to learn. Learning has always been one of the most important meta skills for all of us. And meta skill in the sense of if you're skilled at learning, then you can cash that in for being skilled at other skills. What is interesting, and I don't know if I would have predicted this. I'm guessing I would have predicted this a few years ago, but what's coming true with this AI revolution is that the skill of learning how to learn, or the skill of being a learner, of being open to receive and navigate new knowledge, terrain, skills, etc. This is way more leveraged than it was even 5 years ago. AI turned the dial up on the importance of how good we are at learning or how our learning meta skill is, not down. It didn't replace the need to learn. It actually revved it way up and made it where really it's an autodidact's dream to be able to learn with AI. It's both sides of it is like we can learn way better with AI than we ever could before. Because before, to learn something, you had to read books from one point of view. They would be partial. They would sneak in their sort of biased overstatements of the way that something works without giving you the full nuance because they were committed to some point of view or their own knowledge of this subject was in fact limited. So you'd have to kind of triangulate with other books. You could listen to podcasts, but they'd really be at surface level on a lot of stuff. And to read books, to go deep, you'd have to invest heavily in this. You'd have to really be discerning on how am I picking up the right points of view on a given topic because the books don't advertise which one is truly the most signal dense versus which one will kind of distract you, and they all pretend to be just as important and monumental and the answer and right thing. And so you'd have to sort through that, triangulate from different examples, try this thing in the real world. You wouldn't really understand in advance how long it takes to learn some skill. And so is this 20 hours to be proficient or is it 200 hours to be proficient? Isn't really objectively available on the surface before. Is a book the right place to start, or is doing the right place to start, or is talking to someone about it the right place to start? Should I start online? Should I learn it this way? Blah, blah, blah. It was really important, but it was kind of difficult. Like there was much more difficulty in being really good at learning something 5 years ago. And I would argue it was already extremely super powerful, but it was like now it's more leveraged than it's ever been because now you can learn something and you can tap into a country full of geniuses and a data center that can leverage what you've learned and apply it at scale in a way that was never possible before or was not possible at that scale before. So, and to complete the thought process of the difficulty before with learning, now these AI tools can really amplify and speed up learning, and they can give you, importantly, they can give you the map of learning something new in a way that wasn't really easily available before or easy to find a trustworthy map before. Actually looking up or looking down the road at a certain skill that you want to learn. So let's say it's something as straightforward as getting good at playing my djembe drum, what it takes to become skilled at that, or learning how to learn a language, or learning how to do some computer science thing, or learning to be skilled at poetry or whatever. I mean, poetry might not apply as well as the others to this, but almost all things outside of the most taste-rich creative domains. Now you can actually look at that and you can get a roadmap on, okay, first you want to learn these foundations, and it takes 30 minutes per week for 6 weeks, and you'll be at this level, and then you'll be ready for this, and then you can do this. And this is the yield that you will get once you have invested 10 hours and 50 hours into this. And this is where you would want to go first so that you gain the most momentum with learning this and so that you can accumulate this knowledge. And then this is how you can apply it the soonest to learn by doing soonest and actually get real value as you go on an early level once you picked up these foundations. This sort of very clear roadmap of what it takes to learn a new subject or a new skill is a tremendous unlock, because it helps us to be discerning and it helps us to be extremely resource efficient and energy efficient when we are accumulating something. Whereas before, we're kind of feeling our way through in the dark to learn new stuff. And we talked to one person who's learned this before, but it's not self-evident that they learned this in an efficient way. And it's not self-evident that there isn't a way that's 5 times more efficient, or that you can't learn by doing sooner and get this sort of positive flywheel of learning by doing earlier. And so the power of learning, the way that we can cash in learning, the various things that are available to learn that before I could never learn the language of Mongolian because I would never meet somebody that could speak Mongolian, and now I can. And there's more practical examples than that. But it's unlocked and it's super leveraged. Is both things at once of learning. So learning to be a learner, having this mentality of sort of radical agency. I can learn anything. Anything can be learned. What is the most valuable thing to learn? Okay, that's on the menu for me, and I'm going to access this resource to have a really good strategy and a path for that. That's really powerful, and it's getting more and more powerful and not less. How are you experiencing this in your own life? How have you noticed the difference between something you learned 5 years ago versus something you learned this year?
5 years ago, the opportunities to learn were also abundant. The internet, YouTube already had all the stuff. But now the checks and balances you can apply to sources in the web, which are pretty reliable checks and balances, considering that the vast corpus is also being trained by engineers who want to make sure that things are right. And obviously, I'm speaking about the things you can measure and you can verify, like code, mathematics, and physics, and the rules of it, and the known theories in science, not the current events and profiles of people who like being described by AI. What I mean is that now, as you described it, there is super leverage for the eager learner, and becoming a learn-it-all is meaning just that the habits of engineers, meaning to be lifelong learners, now become even more valuable, because all the stuff you need to know relative what you already know now is being provided to you just by a click and the right question, the right prompts for the right structures and the right systems to tap into, so that now you can really leverage your ideas and act until a point where you have the ability to fail much faster in terms of iterate upon trying out the solutions and failing and trying a different route and exploring new paths forward. So the whole learning process, like the relearning process, which you learn through experience, through trial and error, but also accumulating kind of new knowledge in realms which interests you most. Now you can jump ahead, like with the algorithmic jump board, which you already had in kind of the YouTube algorithms. The more you liked to watch about science, the more science videos would be displayed to you. This would be kind of already an algorithmic jumping board, but now you have an even more precise, a narrowed down version of that with AI. And for example, tools like Gemini Notebook, where you can like get a whole topic into the notebook and spin out the mind map, and then just like a surgeon precisely tap into the part which is most relevant to the challenge you already have. And then you can explore on that, because sometimes you don't even know that there's this knowledge out there to know. And therefore you can get a much faster overview over the whole map and explore the territory much faster by yourself without needing to spend 20 minutes on watching the whole video through. You just can explore the parts about the video which interest you most and go much deeper into these topics at the same time, if they apply very well to the challenge you have and face. So learning to navigate this kind of algorithmic jumping board to benefit your real world challenges and applications makes AI really good in serving our work. And I want to top that off with a quote by Mira Murati, the CEO of Thinking Machines, which open sourced the model, because they believe that AI has to support everyone in his weird way of working and how to work. And she said in her essay that AI exists to serve the work that we do. This work runs on knowledge of how things are done and what is worth doing. And this is a really important point. What is worth doing? Now that we can do virtually anything that we couldn't do before because we had the lack of systems knowledge, at least with computers, it becomes more and more important to focus your energy on what to do, because you still have limited bandwidth and limited attention. And so if you decide to apply your focus and energy on solving real challenges and bringing real value to your customer, whatever that means, this decision is still in your hands, and it still makes you the most valuable part because you have the interaction with the people. You have the context with your customers, with your company, with how things are being done. And you know actually what is worth doing. And then you can utilize AI for that as an algorithmic jumping board to bring even more value faster. Peyton, how can we make sure to decide on what is worth doing? How can we make sure that we engage in a good process with that?
That's a good question. Yeah. Maybe one that I'm still learning about.
Me too.
And it's, I guess there's some, and it is the right question too, is what is worth doing? And there is a lot of, because of all the options that we have, everything that we say yes to, we are saying no to 1,000 other things. And so what we put our attention toward is precious. And so if we pay attention to the right things, if we learn the right things, we will be in such a more leveraged and more positive momentum-y, positive compounding path than if we choose the wrong things or if we choose lesser things in order to do. How to choose what to learn is really interesting. And I think just some razors that I would apply to it is, what are the things where if I learn this, then the next 10 things I learn will be easier, and the next 10 things I do will all be leveraged? What is the one thing that I can learn that will increase my optionality across all paths, and that broadens my possibilities rather than sort of binds me to a narrower path? And so when I think even within certain domains, you could say, oh, I want to learn, I don't know, like 6 months ago, I was learning vibe coding. And two of the things that were optional to me in terms of how to learn them is, one was to learn the current tips and tricks of the day. What is the right Claude MD that I can write? What is the latest tool that I should be downloading? And what are the tactics that people have fleshed out to use this current generation? Or how do I learn about the principles of good architecture? How do I learn about the principles by building stuff that doesn't work and then figuring out how it doesn't work and then figuring out how to redesign it so it does work? What is the more timeless of these things, I think, is important. And so that maybe that's a razor, is like timeless versus just current and short expiration date in terms of what to learn. The other thing though that I think is important is, and not new to this, is how for keeps is our learning? Are we learning it in a way that is integrated into our entire system of understanding and navigation and using and grappling with the world? Or are we learning on the surface level? And so you have the Richard Feynman quote about somebody may know the name of a bird, but they do not know that bird. And I think that this is true with across almost any subject is we're often tempted to be really good at talking about things or knowing the right words and definitions of things. But the real learning is when we understand it at a deeper level that integrates with our whole map, where we have a taste and a sense of these things because we've actually grappled with it and we felt it out on an intuitive level and on a deeper conceptual level rather than surface definitions. I can talk about it at a dinner party, but I can't really explain the first principles. But taking the time to try to get back to the first principles and plug it into our broader view of the world and how we feel out problems and how we understand how we can see the whole. This discipline or this curiosity is extremely important because then we are actually building on a foundation and we aren't just building a house of cards where it falls down over here as soon as we put our attention on something else for 6 months. Some things are the way that we learn things is much more for keeps if we try to get down to the first principles of it. And I'll mention we've never been more empowered to do so than we are now. And so one silly example is when I'm learning Aramaic, this Semitic language, a lot of times I will be trying to plug it into my map by asking, okay, does the way that these two verbs actually map onto these two verbs in Spanish? What is the nuance difference between these two verbs over here, the two words for to know in Aramaic versus saber and conocer in Spanish? And 5 years ago, there's nobody that could have actually explained that to me because nobody is fluent in ancient Galilean Aramaic and in contemporary Spanish. Nobody has both. Like there's a Venn diagram that doesn't touch there
Yeah.
in my experience. But now I can ask those things, and now I can connect this thing with computer science to this thing over here and how I understand biology and physics or psychology, and this cross mapping of plugging in the first principles of the conceptual map of this domain with this thing that doesn't even tie, but that I already have a taste for. This is really powerful and unlocked in a new way because finally these LLMs do have that nuance across all domains. And so the ability to plug things in and to have this drill down to first principles knowledge at a whim, and for me to double click, that doesn't make sense. Explain to me why that is and not this. The ability to grapple with these things until we get down to the first principles is on the menu in a way that it was hard to find when it was just humans and the internet and books that we were talking to. We can really interact with our own thought process and our own mental map with ideas in a really strong way. Doing that and taking advantage of that helps us to have these things more for keeps and more on our foundation where we're getting more and more capable and more our sight increases over time as it relates to these things. How else would you think about the tapping into the new ways that we can learn? You mentioned notebook LM, and for me, I learn best with audio rather than reading. And so now audio and tapping into the way that I learn well is a really important thing to fully utilize and available with these technologies. What else does it look like to fully take advantage of the ways that learning is better than it used to be, or we can learn in new and more powerful ways than we used to be able to?
Mhm. Yeah, everyone is different in his or her way of learning best. And so we have all the modalities available now that we can like do it visually, prepare it visually, so that we can dive in from a perspective of visuals. We can have the auditory, we can have the explanatory and the interaction with it. There's still a few things that need improvement, especially which also may be not so available to be prepared for us, but the implicit knowledge of how to do something locally, that is still the realm of people who do it at the place and at the specific time. So these kinds of things now we can also record and organize much better. So it is not only drawing the map and from the map then spiking down to the places we are most curious about or we want to go to because it solves our problems, but it's also now preparing the knowledge so that we can scale the experience and the implicit knowledge from experienced people to people who start new at the company. this is a way of learning or of building systems which help preparing people to learn at the local level. So at the global level, at the vast space of knowledge available, we have so much now with all the LLMs. But at the local level, we still are good advised if we just go to the expert and say, how do we touch that? How should it feel like when we exchange that ring? How much pressure do we apply to the nut so that the screw won't get loose and so on? So yes, we have general guidance, but the specifics, this will be a realm that we can discover much better if we have the interaction with people. And we come back to this point of now we can interact with knowledgeable people in a much higher level. So we get to a level where we cover the basics very fast, where we drill down to the first principles and catch up with our understanding of how systems work, behave, and are built, and how the characteristics play out in a dynamic scenario as well. But then, because that took us years to get to a point of having a system where we can play around with. Now it's just at the end of a prompt where the things get built automatically without even being asked anymore. And then we can explore and get a feeling for that because the scenario covers a wide array. If we can catch up with the understanding of the specific piece of knowledge, then we can go to the expert and talk with him or her about it. And on this higher level, we now can drill much, much deeper than ever before. It's like a multiplicator.
Yeah.
If we do it right. And if we still value interaction with people that are very knowledgeable and experienced in their specific domains, this is also a way forward, I see, so that we can become a learn-it-all, not a know-it-all. And a learn-it-all is always curious about the islands of knowledge and the vast sea between even more, because I don't know what kind of knowledge is to be uncovered in this vast ocean of things that I do not know. And with every island I discover, I become more aware of how little I actually know. And every question that gets an answer, I spin up 3 more questions. So the curiosity is never ending, and knowledge is infinite. And every time we discover a new island of knowledge, this is a new beginning of a kind of an infinite exploration process which we can engage in. And there, obviously, we have to ground it into a learning process where we can get feedback from reality and challenge and solve real world challenges. How is it for you, Peyton? How do we focus on getting to the timeless chase and the first principles, and then continuing that on the higher level with better people?
Yeah, so many great questions. I do think to highlight a few points is the first, the intro to any subject is now really unlocked in a way that it never was before. There's never been a better way to have something meet you where you're at, look across the whole field of some domain of knowledge and identify the right introduction of learn this thing, then this thing, understand this, then this, then this. This is how to allocate your first 10 hours to get up to a certain level of competence in whatever subject this is, and get you to that level where you can talk to an expert and really dive in and learn to understand their mind more and how the nuance of this, and be able to learn as you go. Kind of like in learning a language, the real trick in my experience is you want to get up to the point where you can talk to strangers, and then you learn by talking to strangers. And maybe it could be people you know, but strangers in my experience are much more abundant sometimes. But to get to that B1 level of language to where you can just go on a bus and have a conversation with this person next to you and learn by doing, I think that applies to a lot of things. If I'm playing guitar, I want to get to the level where I can play some songs and learn by playing songs and enjoy it and have this positive flywheel. And getting to that critical threshold where then we can learn by enjoying, that that chasm we need to bridge. That is way more accessible, and we can really see what price we have to pay for that early on. Whereas like, for example, in high school, I was playing around with guitar. They told me I needed to learn scales. I did it for a week, and I was like, am I going to have to do this for 2 years just playing around with these stupid tedious scales, or is it, am I 1 month away? And even not knowing how the payoffs of these things will translate into reality, it makes it harder to learn along the way if we don't know if we're going to have to do this tedious stuff for 2 years, or if we'll ever get there, or what it takes to get there, or whatever. It's much more within our grasp than it used to be. The other thing I'll highlight is there's some subjects where there's inevitably going to be opinions mixed in with the facts. And so if I think about, like, for me, I'm extremely interested in the history of early Christianity and of languages in first century Palestine. And within that, there are experts. There are a lot of experts, and there's a lot of signal, but there's also just this expert is really committed to this opinion, and they smuggle it in with all the facts. And when I was first starting to learn the Aramaic language, the most popular author, he's a PhD in it, and he's the most well-known figure in the field. What I found out after reading a couple of his books is that probably like 30% of what he confidently asserted as fact was actually just false, and 70% was true. But he made just he asserted these historical claims that were just objectively not true, or fringe at best, but he put it in right with the facts. And then I had to, like, learn how to unlearn half of what I had that was actually noise in my brain that I had assumed was true. And some fields are like this, and truly getting the meta. But I'm not going to read 10 different scholars, a whole ass like 500-page tome of 10 different PhD scholars that are super whatever. Even if I did, I wouldn't be able to keep it straight how this guy said this nuance of this word, and now 32 hours of reading later, I see this guy had this nuance of word. The AI tools that we have can line them all up. It's like, okay, these 10 people had these 10 opinions about this thing. 9 of them said this. This one said this. This is the meta-analysis. This is the signal that you can parse through from looking across the experts. In realms like history, in realms like ancient languages, in many other, I mean, this applies to a lot of different types of subjects that rely on expertise. When you're learning, you can't do a meta-analysis of the 10 experts when you're reading the first expert. It was a fundamental limitation of some fields that made it hard to access the highest signal within a lot of fields that now is accessible. The last thing I'll mention, this is a bit of a non sequitur, but I think just highly interesting and stands out to me, is the one thing that I feel like most people should be far more biased to learn, or I don't know about most people, but the thing that seems where we're tended to undervalue right now, or that's perhaps just the most extremely valuable thing to learn on a new level than it ever was before, is computer science, systems architecture, and the ability to use this resource to do things with software and programs and all of this. The reason being is 10 years ago or 5 years ago, you had to have a team of 10 software engineers doing $150,000 a year work to build this type of a system or tool or software, and it would take 6 months. Now, you literally have something that can do it in 1% of the time for $100, $200 a month. And it's just as good as it was 5 years ago. But you have to learn to be the project manager or the manager of the project manager or something like that. And a ton of value, a ton of solutions, a ton of things are created with systems and software and yada, yada, yada. And the resource that's unlocked right now with that is so crazy and so much more accessible than we would think. It's just really like, I have no technical knowledge. I cannot understand a single line of code. And yet I can solve so many problems that used to be impossible to solve or totally out of reach to solve in 2 days. And it's crazy what a non-technical person can do when you really get into the new skill tree of systems architecture using LLMs and using LLMs within the systems that you build. It's a crazy, crazy valuable resource and valuable learning. Like, I would say, of all the things that we can learn, this is the one that got 1,000 times more valuable in the last few years. And so it's something that I'm kind of, a lot of my smartest and high agency friends, I'm like, hey dude, you got to check this thing out. Like you've got to play around with this thing. Like it's within reach, and it didn't used to be. And what is within reach is 100 times more powerful than you might think. That's kind of the most interesting new learning that I see. How about you? When you look at all this stuff that we talk about, how we can learn anything new, what we used to not be able to learn well that we can learn well, or what is now extremely valuable to learn for the first time. What was the most standout thing that you would point to?
Well, similar to you, I would point to thinking in systems will prove to be extremely valuable, because now you cannot only think about the systems anymore, you can also make them live in the real world and implement these systems with your helpers that you have at the click of a button now. So systems architecture, system thinking, the principles behind it, how you can scale them, what else applies to it. Like when people think about creating web applications, they sometimes only think about the code which is necessary to see something as an output, but then you only have only a very tiny part of it. You have the design, okay, you have the idea, and you have a mock-up, okay, that's cool. But what if you need to think about the security, about the authentication, about the scaling, about the spin-up? And you don't need to think about that anymore, but you have to be at least aware of how important these things are to making your system work and scale it. And therefore, I think not only system thinking, but also thinking for yourself first and sketching out the idea first for yourself, or in interaction with yourself, and the right questions, which can be posed by any kind of system. You can even map it out with AI. Let AI prompt you, learn the skill of reverse prompting so that you can get the most important parts of your vision that is necessary to be filled into the remaining parts of what is necessary to spin up your system, so that AI can help you best. Therefore, systems thinking for yourself first, and then let AI help you to point to the weak points of your thinking, and then steelman your thinking with that, and then improve with that kind of iterations. So iterating systems thinking for yourself, and also getting to the timeless principles of why things are good to be done and what is worth doing at all. It always points to the things which were valuable before, but now can be leveraged in a much better way by a smaller number of people. And like you said, I experienced the same. 7 years ago, it would take me half a year to build out a part of a simulation for an elevator control system. It would take me half a year to get through all the details of naming the variables, of complying with the principles of how to write the namings, and understanding what is the input, what is the output, how does the function behave in its edges, how to test it all, and so on. Half a year. And today would take me 5 minutes to get to the same point,
Yeah.
It is amazing. It is amazing what one can do. But therefore, it's also amazing by how distracted one can become, because always chasing the latest shiny object. And this is also a valuable skill I would want to point towards: knowing what is important, knowing the signal from the noise, and knowing where to focus, and building out a strategy where to focus, and then acting through it, implementing a system with an accountability partner, for example. These kinds of things will be more important, in my opinion. And with that, I am very grateful for you to be here and steer up these ideas together with me. And anything else you want to add?
Now, just the last note that I have is it remains true that the best learning is by doing, and the most integrated learning is by doing. The most powerful and compounding learning is by doing. And a lot of times we have to do some learning to get to the point of learning by doing. But the more hands-on, whatever it is, the more action-y, the more tangible, the more direct the learning can be, the better. And the more for keeps, and the more it helps us along the way. It stops being a cost, but it actually starts being a byproduct of a benefit. And so this is the orientation at a high level with learning that I think is helpful, including in the modern, including in how unlocked all these things are.
And because you need that friction to actually have lasting change inside your brain, thinking for yourself first introduces that friction. And then letting it point out the weak points and improving on those with your thinking increases the plasticity of the direct regarding the direct application.
Yeah. Exactly. Yep. Awesome, man. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for chiming in. Thank you for listening to AIDEAS.
Thank you for listening to AIDEAS podcast, and see you next time.
Peace.
Peace.